I'm Mary Walter, sitting in for Brian Kilmeade. If you're just joining us, then you don't know. But our next guest is the Attorney General of Arizona and a GOP candidate for Senate, Mark Brnovich. Welcome to the Brian Kilmeade Show.
Thank you, Mary, for having me on.
Great to have you here. I have so many questions for you. You are one of 3 states that yesterday announced that you're filing a lawsuit to stop the Biden administration from lifting Title 42. Now, Title 42, for those who don't know, is a public health order that was enacted by the Trump administration because of COVID, saying, well, we can't have all these people coming into this country at the border. If we have a pandemic going on, we have to keep American citizens safe, and we don't need to be importing COVID. But the Biden administration has decided that they're going to do that now. So you are filing a lawsuit. Why are you filing this lawsuit? Are you saying that it still is a public threat, a public health threat?
Well, yeah, Mary, the short answer is we all know, and even the Democrats are acknowledging this, is that Title 42 was working. And despite the fact that we had a record number of people, more than 2 million people illegally enter our country just in the last year, getting rid of Title 42 during the worst border crisis in 2 decades is equivalent to, or like throwing gasoline on a 5-alarm fire. I mean, so we know that the Biden administration still talks about COVID-19 being a threat. And if that's the case, why would you end Title 42, which allows for expedited removal proceedings and allows ICE to basically expel migrants before giving them a chance to claim asylum? It's worked about 1.7 million times, according to official estimates, and it is also estimated that if Title 42 restrictions are lifted, as many as 18,000 migrants will start surging across the southern border. Literally, we're talking about 540,000 people in a single month. And just to put that in context for the listeners, that's like the entire population of a city like Baltimore, Maryland, or Atlanta, Georgia, in 1 month illegally entering our country.
Now, so a lot of questions. We were just talking about why Democrats, they're sounding the alarm. You hear, MSNBC and the New York Times and all these outlets, Washington Post, are all sounding the alarm about the midterms for the Democrats. Hey, it's not going to be good for you. Yet they're doubling down on things like this. Why would they want a visual of hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of these migrants surging the border and coming across? And then we know they get on planes and buses and everything. Why would they risk that visual?
I can't speak to the Biden administrations and their motivations, and I can't tell you what the president's thinking or whoever speaking in his earpiece what they're thinking. But I do know that it's always been that neo-Marxist reality of, the world without borders and making people dependent on a central authority. And there was a lot of us that thought when President Biden took over that he wanted to abolish ICE, but it's clear that he's listening to the progressive far left of his party who essentially just want to get rid of the border altogether. And I do think, I argued a case about 6 weeks ago at the U.S. Supreme Court on the public charge rule, and this was the Biden administration elimination of a policy that said we don't want people dependent on the federal government and welfare benefits, and they got rid of that Trump-era policy, which essentially will allow people to get government benefits like housing, welfare, food stamps, and that, to me, incentivizes people coming here. It also makes people dependent on the federal government. Mary, I'm a first-generation American. I know why people want to come to this country, and it's because it's the greatest country in the world, because the rule of law means something, the Constitution means something, and what the far left, or what the left, the progressive left, the Democrats, what they are doing is they are essentially shredding the very reason what makes this country great and why people want to come here. And it's because of their utopian, neo-Marxist vision of, one world with the central authority. That's what I think.
Well, I think when you combine this influx of people who are illiterate in their own language, let alone English, don't have jobs or very, very low wage earnings, you are going to just create an unsustainable taxation on the economic system in this country, and that may be part of the reason why they're doing it. But with inflation at 40%, inflation is going to skyrocket if this happens.
Oh, absolutely. Look, the left, the progressive left, the Democrats, they're obviously, they want to socialize the economy and nationalize the election. And if you talk to anyone, I still live in the same neighborhood I grew up in. You talk to your neighbors, your friends, your mom's friends from church, and every day people will tell you that the Biden administration's policies are, making it harder to fill up your tank or your car with gas, making it harder to buy groceries. And now we know that as a result of the failed Biden policies, people are less secure and safe. We know that there's a record amount of fentanyl coming into this country. The price of fentanyl is dramatically declining because there's so much of that coming in, and that will kill Americans. And then you add on top of it what you were just talking about when you talk about prices. When you let more than 2 million people into the country illegally a year, it will have an economic impact. And the fact that people like myself and some of my colleagues are having to go to court to try to force the Biden administration to just follow existing law. I mean, 2 weeks ago, we were in federal court. We got an order against the Biden administration because they were refusing to deport people with deportation orders. I mean, so literally you had people that were either convicted or charged of dangerous crimes being released into our communities with no supervision. And so, I mean, it's ridiculous that I have to go into court to force the president to actually follow existing law that's designed to keep Americans safe. It really is head-scratching. Look, this is not humane. It is insane. And as a former gang prosecutor, former federal prosecutor, I honestly don't understand it other than in terms of the progressive left is trying to fundamentally alter and change our country. And part of that is by making a bunch of people dependent on the central government.
Well, that's the Cloward-Piven strategy from, with the Columbia University professors back in the 60s came up with, if you can crash the social welfare system in this country, you can take control. And that, it looks to me like they're trying to do. I have so much I want to talk to you about. Just very quickly, this is Jen Psaki at the White House talking about Title 42. Listen to what she says here, because I think it's very telling.
I think it's important to note for any critics and any lawsuits that Title 42 is a public health directive. It's not an immigration, migration enforcement measure. And the decision on when to lift Title 42 was made by the CDC.
Why does the CDC have that kind of power to affect our immigration laws?
Well, they shouldn't. And a big part of the reason why we are in court very successfully against the Biden administration is because there's one thing worse, apparently, than the Biden administration knows about border policy, and that's apparently about the Constitution and the rule of law. And so, your listeners may or may not know, I filed the first lawsuit against the unconstitutional vaccine mandate. My colleagues and I filed numerous lawsuits pushing back against that federal intrusion. We have a lawsuit right now over the federal mask mandate. And I just generally don't understand, and I just said this a second ago, but what they are trying to accomplish with what they're doing on our southern border, because literally the cartels are enriching themselves. We've essentially allowed gangs and criminal thugs to seize control of our southern border, and people may think, oh, that's an Arizona problem or it's a Texas problem, but I guarantee you it's in our backyard now. It's coming to your front door tomorrow. And this is how much, Mary, the Democratic Party has changed. John F. Kennedy pledged to put a man on the moon in a decade, and Joe Biden is literally going to put a felon in everyone's neighborhood by the end of the decade.
That's a great campaign slogan. I see you worked on that one. I like it. So let's talk about Washington just a little bit. You want to go to Washington. You want to help clean things up there. And I think everyone goes to Washington with that idea. But having lived there for a couple of years, I can tell you it's an absolute bubble, and no one is cognizant of anything outside of Washington, D.C. The Republicans had a chance to change our immigration laws and to toughen them up, and they didn't do it. Right? You talk about the public charge rule. It's a rule. Why didn't Republicans ever make it a law when they had the majority and had the ability to do so? And why do you think that would ever change if they take over at the midterms? Because I don't think it's going to change. I just think as long as you have Mitch McConnell in there, it's not changing.
Well, I can't speak for anybody else, but I guess I had never run for office before I ran for Attorney General. I'm a first-generation American. I'm a public school kid. I've always had to be a scrappy fighter, with the last name like me. And so I can't speak to what anyone else is doing. But, I've stood toe-to-toe with gang members. I've, been involved in death penalty cases. I've literally prosecuted people in my own political party. I opposed the governor when he did the lockdowns. So what we need in D.C. is people that are comfortable in their own skin, that have a coherent philosophy and understand that, government is not the solution. Government is the problem. And Barry Goldwater used to say that any government that's big enough to give you everything is big enough to take it away. I think one of the things that drives and motivates me, having parents live through World War II and communism, is that we have to be wary of that concentration of power in any entity, especially the federal government. The framers of our Constitution never envisioned some of the very things that the federal government's doing right now. And what disappoints me so much as a Republican, right now, 60% of the Department of Education budget is discretionary. People go back and forth about how much they should be spending, and then Democrats want this much, and the Republicans compromise this much. And no one's asking the fundamental question, why do we even have a federal Department of Education? In 1980, Ronald Reagan wanted to get rid of it. And when you have that kind of control in D.C., that undermines local schools control. And we see what's happening here in places like Scottsdale or what happened in Virginia. And so we need to make sure we have people in D.C. that fundamentally understand that, or want to go to D.C. not to make government more efficient, but to make government smaller. And that's what I want to do. And I fundamentally understand that in my core. And I can't speak to anybody else, but I'm a fighter, and that's what I want to do in D.C.
Yeah, well, I wish you the best of luck, and good for you also for suing about Title 42. We need more states to step up and do this, and it's such a slow slog when you have to sue in order to get them to actually enforce the laws that are on the book. It shouldn't be that way, and yet it's the world turned upside down. Mark Brnovich, thank you so much for joining us on the Brian Kilmeade Show.